Okay, hello friends of the Teeworlds, children back. Today we are going to continue with server-side development. So if you're only interested in the client, you can skip this episode. If you're working on a DDRS network-based source code, you can actually follow along this episode, but we are going to use our game controller that we created in the last episode. So let's get right into it. The plan for today is to create a basic level system, not something fully functional, but the basics. We want to print some level up message every now and then if we do some kills. That's exciting, isn't it? Okay, so to pick up kills, we need a new function in our game controller. As you remember, this code is from the last episode, and we are currently picking up spawns, and what we want to do now is picking up kills and then giving the killer some XP and leveling them up. Okay, so there's on character spawn, there's also probably on character death. Where do we find these functions? We find them in iGame controller. You can control click that or press Control P and type in game controller.h. Wonderful. And here we see all the functions that we have that we can hook in, and as you can see, we want those virtual functions because those are meant to be overwritten. And we have on character death over here. So let's copy that line, Control C, and paste it in our game controller. Okay, we can leave everything as it is, and then we go to our C++ file and copy it in here as well. We remove the virtual key and we prefix it with the class name game controller my mod. Whoops. The same way as we did up here. Then we remove the semicolon at the end and we add our curly braces. Okay. Don't forget to call the parents function that we overwritten. So we also want to call on character death in here. We pass on the victim and the killer, also the weapon. So as you remember, what we are doing in this line is we make sure, since we overrode the function that we inherited, we make sure that we still call the function from the base class so that we don't lose this logic. Where did I end up? This logic now, because we still want to do scoring and stuff. So we keep this code. Cool. Okay, by the way, if you are following along in the DDRS network source code, you can just pick any other controller to put in your code. So as we are now working in our game controller in the function on character death, all the code we put in here, you can just put also in here. That's basically the same because we call this function over here and then we put our code. It's pretty much the same as calling this code and then calling your code. So that's fine. It's just for structuring to have your own game controller. It's much cleaner. But if you're following along in DRS network where you can't create your own game controller, you can put it in the file gamecontroller.cpp in on character death, or you can put it in on character death in the DDRS controller. So get creative there. Anyways, so let's remove that. So let's get right into it. What do we want to do now? First of all, I want to print some message. I know we did it plenty of times and you're probably sick of it, but I'm going fast now. We need a buffer, we need a string formatter, and the second argument is the size of our buffer, which we can get with our macro. And then we have our format string. And I want to print a simple message saying who killed who in chat. So everybody receives a chat message if someone gets killed. Maybe let's split that up in multiple lines because it will get long. Okay, so I use two format specifiers, two strings. So we have to pass in two more arguments here that replace those strings. And I want to put in the names of the killer and the killed person. So killer and victim as they are called here. So first we need the killer, and to get the actual username of the player we have a function in the server. As you remember, we used that one already. It's called server client name, it takes an client ID as an argument, so we kind of have to get the client ID of the killer. And as you can see, we have a pointer to a cPlayer object in here. And I know by experience that cPlayer has a function exposed that's called getClientID. It's spelled like this, like get CID. And this will give us the client ID of the killer. And then we need another comma, another argument for our second format specifier. And we put in, whoops, I put the comma at the wrong position over here. And the second one would also be a server client, whoops, client name. And this time we want the victim. And for the victim, we have a character which is a bit different. So the character itself has no ID exposed. So we need to get the player from the character. So if we do pVictim, this will give us a pointer to a character instance. And on the character, we have a function exposed that's called getPlayer, which will give us a cPlayer instance where we then can call on getClientID. Okay, wonderful. So that code won't work, but I will show you some error messages so you learn something. So let's try to build it. Okay, as you can see, we get invalid use of incomplete type class character. We also get invalid use of incomplete type class iServer, and the same for player. So player, character, and server, all those types that we are using here are incomplete. And that means that we do some kind of forward declaration here using the class keyword, but we actually never defined this class. Well, we did define this class over here if we control click it in game server entities character.h. But since this code will be compiled before there was ever any include of the character.h, the compiler currently doesn't know this data type. So before we use the class, we have to define it. Then the simple fix for that is just include the character.h file. So include all the headers of the data types that you're using. Sometimes they are included already, but if not, the compiler will yell at you and it will say invalid use of incomplete type. So invalid use of incomplete type usually means you are missing a include. And then it tells you the type, and then you just have to figure out in which file this type is located. And it's usually straightforward because character, the class C character is located in character.h. The class C player is located in player.h. And you can just do Ctrl P and search for player.h, and you can see there's only one. There's also a players, plural, in the client side, but we are working on the server side. So this is our file. So it's located under game server. Let's start with that boy. So let's do a include game server player.h. And we also want a include for game server entities character.h. If you don't know the path by experience like I do, just look them up, do a search for character, and you can see it's located under game server entities. Wonderful. And then we also need this one here. So server is a pointer to iServer, which is also an incomplete type over here. So we can control click that and then control click on the type, and we can see the class iServer is defined over here. So it's located under engine server. So we also want to include that boy in here. Include engine server.h. So let's give it another try. Let's see if it builds now. C game context does not name a type. Okay, so we are missing one more boy, and that's game context. So we want to do include game server game context.cpp. Okay. We still do get a warning, so if I recompile here. So the build is working now, but we still get a warning. It says no return statement and function returning non-void. That means we are not returning anything here, and the function is not a void function. So void means you don't return any data, and if you have a data type in here, for example a int, we want to also return a int at the end of our function. The reason that we return some int is in CTF the game controller uses on character death to return data about the flag holder. So if the person who was killed had a flag, it will return 1, otherwise it will return, well, it's actually not 1 and 0, it's like some bit flag magic, whatever. This return value is used in CTF to pass on data. Okay, so we don't do CTF here, but whatever, we have to return something, so let's return 0, which essentially means didn't have a flag, but yeah, just return 0 here, so the compiler won't yell at you. Okay, so let's see if that worked. And it did. So now that it builds, let's actually send this message to the chat. So we want to use the game server pointer to access send chat, because game server is pointing to our favorite class cGameContext. As you remember, send chat is exposed there. And it takes the following arguments: chatter client ID, so it's coming from the server, it's mode chat all, and it's going to be sent to everybody, so -1. And the text we want to send is a buff, which is the string we just formatted. Okay, let's see if it builds. It does, wonderful. So let's start the server. And don't forget to set the game type. So as we created a game controller in the last episode, this code will only be run if we set sv_gametype to my mod, or however you called your mod. So make sure you're actually using your mod, otherwise, well, your code won't be run. Okay. Let's start a client and let's do some killing. And we expect to get some message printed in the chat, who killed who, if someone dies. Okay. So let me kill my dummy. And as you can see down here, Silly Dummy killed Dragon. So that's working perfectly fine. That is really nice. Okay, let's do some basic leveling code. As you remember, if you want to save data on a per client basis, so for example, if you want to have a variable that stores state and it's a different state for every player, you want to use either character.h or player.h. Those two like classes hold data depending on every like connected T. And the character one will be wiped as soon as the character dies. So all information that we store in the character class will be deleted as soon as the player dies. So that's not very interesting for our leveling system, because you don't want to start from 0 with your experience and levels if you die. You want to keep that as long as you're connected. Actually even longer, and you want to save it into some account system, but we are not going to cover that today. We are just printing some leveling messages for now. Okay, so let's open player.h, scroll to the bottom and make sure it's public, so that's accessible for us a bit easier. So let's use this public keyword here, which means that all those variables in here that we define over here can be accessed from outside of the player class. So for example, these variables that are following after the private keyword can't be accessed from the outside. So for example, we have a variable called m_dummy on player.h, and if we now go to my mod and do a p killer, which is a pointer to a player, and try to access this variable, m_dummy, and try to compile it, it says the variable m_dummy is private within this context. So we can only use mdummy within the class, not outside of the class, because we are currently in the class game controller my mod. So we can't use private variables from the player. That's why we want to make them public so we can access them here. Okay, so let's put all our account related data in some struct. So that's a struct, for example, over here. And structs are, well, they come from C, and in C++ they are pretty much the same as classes. They have all the same features, but we can use them just to bundle a few variables into one, into one box. So let's create a struct with all our data. We can also give it a name, so to say. Let's call it account data. And in here we have the following, let's close that with a semicolon, very important. And in here we have the following variables, m_xp and m_level. That's all for now. Okay. So the way I wrote it is a bit different to the one up here. As you can see, there's no data type provided after struct, and it directly instantiates one object or like one instance of that struct. We are doing it a bit differently. So we create a data type, so to say, here. So it's a bit more used like classes. And we are actually also creating a constructor in here. The reason that I'm creating a constructor is because I want to make sure that all those variables are initialized properly. Okay, and then we created this data type, account data, and we can create a instance of that account data, m_account data. So what's done in one step up here, we do in two steps. So they create a struct and then they create a instance of that struct. What we do down here is we create a struct and we give it a name. So we essentially created a data type, and then we use this data type to create a instance of that data type. Okay, and here we provide one function in that struct that has the same name as the struct. So this is the constructor. So this function will be called as soon as the struct is created, and it's created down here. So when this line is executed, a struct of this data type will be created and it will be initialized accordingly. Cool. And since this is public, we can access it now in my mod in here. So we have pkiller, which is of type cPlayer. And in cPlayer, so in player.h, we put our struct and the variable m_account_data, so we can access it. Let's see if that works. Just put it like this and see if it compiles. And it does. We get a warning that this line has no effect. Yeah, obviously that was just for testing. If we just do this single line here, it's doing nothing. Duh, but it compiles, so it's not complaining that this variable does not exist or is private or whatever. So all is good. That is very nice. And now we can access the XP and the level over here with a dot syntax. So since this is not a pointer, we use a dot. If this were a pointer, we would use a arrow like this. So there are these two ways of accessing like attributes, via the pointer syntax or via the direct member syntax. I don't know the name for on pointer. Okay, so let's get right into it and increase some level of the killer. But before we do that, I want to quickly mention something. Our code is currently possibly crashing because the victim and the player could both be null pointers, which then would crash if we try to like call something on a null pointer. So pkiller, for example, could be null if I am like firing a grenade and while it's flying in the air, I disconnect. And if I disconnect, my player object gets deleted, but my projectile won't. So my grenade is still flying in the air. And if that hits a player and kills it, that player will then die and the on-character death will be called. And I will be the killer, but I already left the game. I'm actually not quite sure. It was like, I've seen projectiles being deleted on leave and not, and on kill and not. Maybe in vanilla they get destroyed, maybe in DDoS network they don't, and that's why I confused something. But that's like one possible way. There are many occurrences where victim or killer could be null. If you get passed in a pointer and you use that pointer to access some member functions or attributes, make sure it's not null before. That's super important, otherwise you have potential crashes. Okay, so what we want to do is we only want to print this message over here if those are not null pointers. So we want to do a check in here if p killer and p victim. So as you remember, everything in C++ is true other than null, 0, false. And if those pointers are invalid, they would have the value null. If they were valid, they would have like some memory address in there. Well, that's not how they look like, something like that. And that's like not null or false, so it's valid and thus true. So we can just check it like this, if p killer and victim. So if those two pointers hold valid objects and are not null pointers, we want to execute this code of like printing the message. Okay, so for like printing the message that includes both players, we have to make sure that both of these pointers are valid. And now we want to give the killer some experience, and in that case we actually don't care about the victim. So even if the victim somehow gets null, we still want to give the killer some XP. Okay, so down here we have a if p killer, and in here we want to do our leveling code. Okay, so let's see. What we can do here is, for example, take the experience. So we do p killer, which holds a pointer to C player, where we have the variable m account data, which is defined over here, which is of type C account data. So it has these member attributes. So we can do m underscore xp to get the xp. And what we want to do now is like increment it with plus plus. As you remember, it's the same as plus equals 1. So it will just increment it by 1. So if your XP was 0, it's now 1. Cool. So everybody who kills someone gets 1 XP more. That is exciting already. So then we can copy the XP and do some check. So now is your time to come up with some elaborate XP system on like when do you want to level up and how much XP do you need, whatever. I'm going with something simple, and that is like this boy here. So what this crazy ass line is doing is it's basically dividing XP by 10 and looking if the remainder is 0. So this variable, this whole string here, is holding the XP of the player that just killed someone. And then we do percentage 10, which stands for modulo 10. And modulo is basically doing a division, and then it doesn't return you the result of the division, but the remainder of the division. And then we compare the remainder to 0. So this will be true every 10 times we increment our XP. Because like if you divide XP by 10, you don't get any remainder if it's like multiples of 10, if that makes any sense. So if XP is 1, it won't be a clean division, so you have a remainder. If it will be 10, the remainder will be 0, and thus this will be true. And if it's 20 as well. So every 10 times we increment our XP. So every 10 kills we want to level up. That's not very challenging because every level has an equal amount of needed XP to level up, and that's unusual, but it's simple. And I just wanted to show you this cool modulo operator to quickly scaffold down some code. And also make sure that the modulo operator is basically doing a division. So if the XP would be 0, you would get a crash actually. But we increment XP before we use it, so we should be fine. Wonderful. Okay, so let's get right into it. What do we want to do every 10 times someone kills someone? We want to increment the level. So we take the level and we do a plus plus. And then we also want to send a message to the person who just leveled up and say like, woo, you leveled up. So we do another buffer. The reason we need another buffer is because this buffer in here is in this local scope, so it won't be alive down here. We could also, for example, move this buffer out here. That's also fine. Then we can reuse it, whatever. Let's do that. Then we want to format it, string format, above, size of above. And then we say like level up. Whoops, I can't type. You are now level and then %d to get a decimal, and then we put in the current level of the killer in here. Bam. And then we want to send that only to the killer. So we do a game server send chat. The sender is the server, the mode is chat all, the recipient is only the killer, so we need the client ID of the killer. We already got it up here, so we do pkiller and then get the client ID with get CID, which stands for get client ID. And as last argument we have the text, which is the buffer that we formatted over here. So we are sending this level up message every 10 kills. Okay, let's see if that boy works, and let's build it. It doesn't build because I misspelled size of. Okay, so let's run the server. Don't forget to specify the game type. And let's do some kills. Wow, I actually now have to do 10 kills. That will take some time. Okay, wait, let's actually change that to every second kill, because I don't want to kill 10 times now so that you have to watch me play. So let's do a sv_game type mymod to specify the modification, otherwise your code won't run. And let's join some server. Okay, so now what we expect to happen is every time we kill someone, we get a message printed in the chat, and every second kill we get a level up. So we get a printed message of the kill, we know that already, and the second kill should level up me already. And as you can see, it says down there, level up, you are now level 1. And if I do another kill, it shouldn't level up, but the next time I should become level 2. And as you can see, bam, I'm now level 2. So yeah, that's a basic level system. There's nothing saved yet, so if I reconnect, my levels are gone. But we can do that in a future episode. So yeah, that was pretty packed already. I hope you learned something, and yeah, see you in the next episode.